Distinguished speakers and dear participants, very good afternoon and good evening. Welcome to the NICE webinar on Malaysia caught between the US-China rivalry. This topic is of great importance in Nepal, as Nepal is also often trapped between China and India or China and United States. Many of the countries in South Asia are often asked to choose between China or the other. It is in this context that today's topic is of great interest. To talk briefly about NICE, Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement is an independent, apolitical, and non-partisan think tank which believes in freedom, democracy, and a world free from conflict. We envision a world where sources of insecurity are identified and understood, conflicts are prevented or resolved, and peace is advocated. The speaker for today is Dr. Peter Chang Thiam Chai, who is Deputy Director of Institute of China Studies at the University of Malaya, Kuala Lumpur. It was a pleasure to meet Dr. Peter at his university, and he hosted me for a lecture in December 2018. Dr. Peter holds his doctorate from Harvard University, United States, master from Princeton Theological Seminary, United States, and bachelor from King's College, London. His area of expertise are comparative philosophy, Confucianism and Christianity, political theory and political philosophy, comparative religion, and social sciences. He has published several books. To name few, in 2016, he came with a book, Chinese Religiosity in a Post-Marxist China and a Postmodern World, which is published by Georgetown University Press, and Bishop Joseph Butler and Wang Yang-ming, a comparative study of their moral vision and view of conscience, which was published by International Academic Publishers. He is actively involved at several academic institutions, such as Association of Asian Studies, European Association of Chinese Studies, Society of Asian and Comparative Philosophy, International Confucian Association, Society of Christian Ethics, American Academy of Religion, and others. Ladies and gentlemen, without much delay, let me once again welcome Dr. Peter for this lecture. Peter, you'll have around 15-20 minutes, which will be followed by question. We request all our participants and viewers to contribute articles for NICE. Please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Please visit our website and come with suggestions. If you have any questions regarding the lecture, please drop it in our chat box or comment below the Facebook Live. Thank you very much. Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Pramod. I really appreciate this opportunity to have a conversation with you and with the rest of your invitees and staff and fellow academics in Nepal and in Southeast Asia. Greetings to you from Kuala Lumpur, Southeast Asia. I'm sure some of you would have ventured through Kuala Lumpur at some point, or at least to Singapore in this part of the world. I'd like to begin this sort of short opening remarks on the title Malaysia Caught Between US and China Rivalry in three parts. One is a very quick historical overview between the relationship between Malaysia, US, and China. Then I will want to go right into the current US-China rivalry and how it's being played out and how Malaysia is reacting to that. And then finally, I will close with some what I see as potential hotspots, potential points of conflicts that is concern for us in this part of the world, that we fear that we could be drawn into conflict that we don't really want to be part of. Let's do some historical overview first. I think for those our friends in Southeast Asia, you are quite familiar that for us who are post-colonial countries who gained independence in the 50s, we were all non-allied countries. We decided to stay neutral in the Cold War, not taking any particular position. And this is somewhat still the same, I think. More or less, ASEAN as a whole still choose to stay neutral, not wanting to take either side. And as we go into this, what we quite commonly call now a new Cold War between US and China. And then coming up as a new country, newly independent country, Malaysia has got very close ties because of our post-colonial colonial history with the British legacy and the Western education that we had. we were very well connected to the Western international economic order and also the cultural political order as well. We inherited the political liberal democracy structure. So the ties with the West is quite intimate, and we are actually a lot more familiar by the fact that we speak English with the West than with China. So that bond is there, even though we have a difficult colonial history. So that it extends towards our ties with America. America was very dominant, play a very instrumental role in helping us to develop into the country where we are now, especially in the 70s and 80s. It was only in the 80s onwards that China began to emerge, come out of its self-imposed isolation and interacted with Malaysia and the rest of the world. And that's where that bond between Malaysia and China begins to sort of crystallize. Historically, in the 50s and 60s, there was a difficult period when communist China was involved in some of these communist insurgencies in Southeast Asia, and that really brought some difficult chapters or episodes into modern Malaysia life vis-a-vis communist China. By 1974, our then Prime Minister Abdul Razak restored diplomatic relationship with China. And from then on, the relationship has really built. And from the 80s and 90s, we sort of roughly were able to manage these two relationships between China and US fairly well. We don't really need to be pushed into a particular corner to take particular sides. The divide that we normally take between these two relationships increasingly was that it's an economic relationship with China that matters. It is our ties with China at the economic realm that solidifies that relationship. And then increasingly, as China takes over the economic component, the role with America plays more security role, the regional security in terms of the military alliances and exercises that we had. And it basically broadly sort of framed in those terms now. Most countries in Southeast Asia, for example, like Singapore, see also their ties with America more on the military side, and then on China, we're on the economic side. So that's the sort of dynamics that is being played out. But we are, lately, there has been more push now with the current, as the rivalry between US and China sort of heats up. We feel that both powers are coming to Kuala Lumpur and sometimes to our institutions to make their cases to us in various forms. The Americans would caution us not to get too close to China, and then the Chinese would make their plea to us that do not gang up with others to oppose the rise of China, and that sort of dynamics as we see being played out. We are kind of torn between the two. We are not exactly sure because these two rivals are almost in some ways we don't really want to take any sort of sides really, and we want to be able to coexist with both. But sometimes it doesn't always happen that way. Having said that, in general, our leaders have already, at least at the diplomatic level, has always reiterated Malaysia's neutral stance. But there are some individuals, characters that comes onto the stage that perhaps put the position in a somewhat more vocal way. You know, our previous Prime Minister, Dr. Muhammad Mahathir, has been known to be quite sharp or quite particularly a different way of presenting how he sees these relationships being played out. and he has been known to be, he's not particularly a friend of China per se, but he has been known for his fairly anti-Western stance as well. So when he was in his recent stint as the prime minister, made it very clear how he wants to see that relationship played out, especially in the South China Sea disputes. But in general, the Malaysian diplomats and leadership has been a little bit more diplomatic and try to be much more balanced in how we deal with that relationship. There are certain things that draws us to China and certain things that sort of draws us to America. We like America because we are familiar with America's, in some ways because we are also a democracy. We are familiar with the system. At the soft power level, we don't really understand China that well. We may not like all that we see in China, in America, but at least we can see it. We know what America is like. You know, it is a very open society. The institutional procedures and all is open to us. So we have a good understanding of America, even though we may not necessarily agree with all that is coming out from America. On China, however, it's a little bit difficult because the government itself is still quite close. Outsiders still have a difficulty to really understand how the workings of the government, the thinking of the government. You know, language is probably one of the issue, culture is as well, and then also the political structure also. So there is that at the political soft power dimension, there is that tension at one place that we are drawn to the American. We are much more familiar with the Western model, even though the Western model, for some of us, has lost its way in some ways. But at least we know where they came from and the way they could find their way back. Whereas the Chinese model is still a very unfamiliar model to us. So we would tell our counterparts, the Chinese counterparts, that this is one of our concerns that we have when it comes to values, liberal democracies, values, and others. But we are very dependent on the Chinese economic model. The Belt and Road Initiative has really come in and really drawn us, and we become very integrated. The economic sort of dynamism that China brings in is in some ways historic for us in Malaysia. It's going to raise us up to the next level, industrial 4.0, digital economy, and all those things, So we feel that we can no longer be completely detached from the China economic model, and this is where we felt the strength. The Chinese strength is the economic model, and that's where we have some criticism with the American side, right? Because the American side right now, when they come over to us, we say that your presence in Malaysia right now is mainly military, really. Where else you don't really have a lot of economic presence in this part of the world. We don't really see much of you guys now. And then your soft power also, your current administration hasn't really been the best exemplary sort of a model for the liberal democratic values that you guys used to espouse, you see. So the American sort of presence here has sort of been eroded somewhat, largely because of their own internal sort of upheaval. The other thing I want to bring in is the race and religion dimension, which is because it plays into the two relationship as well. As Asian, Malaysian, Chinese, we feel, it's part of the Asian sort of civilization. So at the end of the day, Malaysia is a Muslim country. Even though there are some values that Malaysia as a democracy may not find that close alignment with the Chinese model. Malaysia, because of its Islamic country, felt that the West has not been fairly given the Islamic world the fair due. And they felt that sometimes, even if they do not necessarily side with China, but because of how they felt the West has treated the Islamic world, they tend to sort of do not want to get too close to the West either. So that religion dimension comes into play in our local politics. Sometimes we see it, and also at the international stage. Okay, so that's the general kind of overview here. Will the rivalry right now? There's a lot of talk that the tension is high, that the rivalry has come into the point where there is possibly, we have the trade war now, we're going into a cold war. Is there a possibility that it will turn into a hot war? From outside, most immediately is the South China Sea dispute. Just in April, there was an incident involving Malaysia Petronas oil exploration ship, West Capella, exploring off what Malaysia claims to be our economic zone territory. But then a Chinese research vessel came around and start to follow or sort of testing up a standoff situation as the Chinese wants to also make their presence known that those are disputed waters. They do also have a claim on those waters. So the standoff between Malaysia and China drew the attention of the Americans and Australians. And as Americans and Australians, warships came around, got on too close to those that's vis-a-vis standoff. So there was this concern that this kind of situation would be a recurring thing, even though the two countries themselves, Malaysia and China, does not necessarily see this as a military sort of standoff, but a third party like the Americans and Australians would add in a new dimension that could cause this standoff to become more volatile. So we do not want to see that. We want to see a minimization at that kind of thing, because there could be a miscalculation or misinterpretation of each other's maneuvers that could lead to an accidental war. The other hot spot that we were concerned is Taiwan. We were hoping, we do want to see that there will be a way in which Taiwan can be resolved without further provocation from either side, and then either the status quo could be kept, or there will be a political solution to it. And we certainly, although Taiwan is somewhat further away from us than the South China Sea, but if there's any conflict between the two giants over that territory, then it will have rippling effect that will definitely affect us as well. So overall, Malaysia's position is that we do not want to see the two giants to get into open conflict, and we really do not want to see having to choose either side. But that may not always be the reality. Sometimes we may be forced to choose one over the other on specific cases, on specific issues, but not as a general sort of stance as a whole. Okay, I will just stop now, and then maybe I can take some questions, and then we can have some conversation. Yeah.
Sure. Actually, we have got lots of questions, so maybe I'll put 3 in a set so that you can answer it.
Okay.
The first question is, does ASEAN have the power and resources to cushion the impact of superpower collision? This is the first question. Second is, what is Malaysian stand on Indo-Pacific strategy? And third is, Malaysia finds itself caught amidst South Korea-Japan trade wars and the sluggishness of the Eurozone economy, partly from the uncertainty surrounding Brexit. Will these have significant impacts on its position on Sino-American trade war?
Could you repeat the third one, the first few lines? I didn't quite get it.
Malaysia finds itself caught between South Korea-Japan trade war and the sluggishness of the Eurozone economy, partly from the uncertainty surrounding Brexit. Will these have significant impacts on its position on Sino-American trade war?
Okay, let's see whether I can understand your third question. You're asking me the Japan and Korea war and then the Brexit and Europe dynamics. Looking at those two dynamics, how will it affect Malaysia's reaction to US and China?
Yes.
Okay. I will come back to that afterwards. All right. Let me just first whether ASEAN has the cushion, and I don't think so. I don't think we are very vulnerable if US and China gets into an open conflict. We are very susceptible, very vulnerable to that conflict. So it is to our utmost interest, even self-preservation, self-survival, that we should try to prevent that these two giants, and especially if the conflict happens in our home, in our backyard, you know, if it is a conflict somewhere else, that's fine. And if they want to do the conflict not at their home turf, but in our backyard in South China Sea, it will be devastating. So no, it is absolutely ASEAN's interest that we want to prevent that happening. And if it does happen, we don't have the muscle, the cushion, or whatever. All we can do is to plead that this doesn't happen. So the second point about the Indo-Pacific, Malaysia has been quite reluctant in jumping on this because it is seen as a containment strategy to want to contain in China. So we have not really officially signed onto it. I think some members of ASEAN may have been involved in it, but ASEAN as a whole has been a little bit ambivalent about this Indo-Pacific thing as well. So now the third question about the Brexit and the UK, and we don't see that dynamics playing out in ASEAN. I just don't see the connection there. How do you see it, Pramod? Do you have any particular angle that you're looking at? How does that dynamic plays out in ASEAN?
Actually, this question has been sent by one of our participants, so I don't know what you wanted to ask.
Okay. Yeah, because ASEAN is not Brexiting from anywhere. ASEAN is not involved in a trade war with another smaller bloc like Japan and Korea. It's in two smaller middle power in a trade war with each other, but we are not exactly in that situation either. So no, I don't really see that. I think I would probably just say that the trade war between US and China has been bad for us. In the short term, some of the countries may benefit. You know, there may be relocation of some factories to Vietnam or Laos and others. But in the long term, it has not been very good for us. We do want to see, hopefully, that the two giants will be able to resolve their trade war and have a free trade going on again between the different countries. Yeah.
Let me go with the second set of questions. There are reports suggesting that the public's confidence in the government is waning. Does it have any contribution to slow economic development of Malaysia? What is the reason behind the government's...
The public's confidence in Malaysia?
Yeah, is gradually decreasing. What is the reason? Is it because of economic slowdown?
You mean because of the COVID-19 thing? Are you talking about Malaysia economy, right?
Yeah, Malaysian economy.
Okay.
Second is, are China and the United States a strategic rival in Southeast Asia in the context to provide help to the region to combat the pandemic to win hearts and minds? Third is, Malaysia has placed to the US Treasury watch list for currency manipulation in May for its bilateral trade and current account surplus. The central bank has denied the nation manipulates its currency and said it supports free and fair trade. Any comments on this?
Okay, the last question is out of my league. I really don't, I'm not very familiar with it. So I'm sorry, I will not be able to provide any insight to that. Let me take on the first question. The Malaysian economic sentiment, like everyone everywhere else, let me just put it the pre-COVID-19 situation. The pre-COVID-19 was pretty confident, was pretty buoyant, you know. There was optimism because in this part of the world, we just say that we are riding on the tail of the dragon. If China economy grows, China economy stays on track, the rest of us will benefit, you see. So this is pre-COVID-19. So overall, the picture has been quite positive. Then COVID-19 comes along, as with everywhere else, you know, our economy went on to its knees. We basically shut the whole thing down, and we are now trying to pick ourselves up again, as with the rest of the world. So there's a lot of casualty. The mood is downcasted, and we still do not really know the extent of the devastation in terms of employment and industries that will be completely sort of crippled by this COVID-19. Some of them may not be able to revive themselves. For example, Malaysia is very dependent on tourism. We got zero tourists right now. Our borders are shut to international travelers. So hotels cannot survive. So when will it come back again? We are exactly not very sure. So the confidence has been somewhat downbeat, but it's not unique to Malaysia, I think. To be more specific, the Malaysian political situation, also domestic political situation, has not been very stable either. So that adds to another sort of uncertainty. So overall, it has not been a pretty picture, but the bright spot, if there is a bright spot, is that if China does eventually comes out of its own sort of downtrodden, reach the bottom of its sort of dip in terms of economic sort of stagnation, and then climb itself up again, and hopefully it will also give us some momentum to climb up off the pit that we are in right now. The pandemic itself, I think US has not been exceptionally effective, both in terms of their own dealing with the COVID-19 and also their international presence, unfortunately. It's just really exposed how vulnerable, how far America has gone from, you know, its status as both a superpower in many ways. We always associate the first world, the West developed world, with very superb world-class public health system. If we have any public health crisis, it was the West that came to our rescue, but COVID-19 proved it the other way. So China has been, although it originated in China, but China has responded much more effectively, and they have taken the lead in terms of showing how we can deal with this public health issue, I think. So the pandemic has been a very a plus in terms of, if there is a plus to be given between the two rivals, a plus for China and a minus for the US. Okay.
Let me take another 3 questions. There is one question: what is Malaysian view on the China's Uyghur issue, the Xinjiang and all? Second is, many countries are boycotting Huawei for their 5G program. How is Malaysia reacting to it? Is there US-China rivalry even on these issues? And third is, Malaysia has willingly shown pragmatism in its diplomatic approach towards China, especially in dealing with the COVID crisis. Do you agree that amid this situation, US should not push Malaysia to pick sides with Washington rivalry with China?
Okay, the Uyghur issue is a very, very issue that strikes right deep into the Malaysian heart, because we are a Muslim country, and obviously this is something that we are deeply concerned about. And when we meet up with our Chinese counterparts, we will raise this question with them. We will tell them our concerns, and then they have made a lot of effort to explain it to us, and even asked us at our level at the Institute of China Studies to organize tours for us to visit Xinjiang. We hope that they can solve the problem. We are very sympathetic to the concerns and the issues that they have. They do have certain sets of issues that they need to address in Xinjiang. Our concerns is that they are able to solve these issues without excessive violation of human rights. And the other thing is that, as I said earlier on, is that because it is still a fairly close country, so we don't really know exactly what's happening. All the things, the information that we get in Malaysia is via the West, and not that necessarily that the information that comes from the West is not correct or not inaccurate, but it is coming from a source that may not necessarily be sympathetic to China. And it is to China's interest that they should also open up to provide access to Xinjiang, so that we can have a much more balanced and fuller picture of what's happening in Xinjiang. They've been trying to do that, but they do have a sense of challenges that is quite complicated. I think most of us are sympathetic towards it. In Malaysia's government official stand is that we raise our concerns with the Chinese, and we just hope that they can solve the Xinjiang problem in an effective way without excessive violation of human rights. The second question about Huawei is that we have got no issue about adopting Huawei as in our 5G rollout. In Mahathir's words, it says that, this is just the Americans getting jealous by the fact that they are no longer the only one that can spy on others. The fact that the government says that, there is a possibility that, with this laying out of this infrastructure, that there will be some compromises and that sort of thing. But small countries like us are always vulnerable to that kind of thing. And then it's an open secret that this sort of spying has happened all the time. And it's just now that the Chinese are part of it as well. So that issue, we know the risks, the national security risk that comes with it, but it is not exclusively to Huawei. It's not only a risk that only comes with Huawei. If we go for another supplier, non-Chinese telecommunication company, we will also have that risk, you see. So I know that there are a lot of debates about, the pros and cons, but at least the Malaysian position is that we have decided to go with Huawei. By the way, Huawei has chosen Kuala Lumpur as the Southeast Asia regional hub. And also, and not only Huawei, but Alibaba has also chosen Kuala Lumpur as a Southeast Asia regional hub. So they do see Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur as a strategic and important Southeast Asia center. So we're going to be a lot more integrated at the 5G and Industrial 4.0 revolution level, part of the China picture here. The Alibaba has launched a smart city project in Kuala Lumpur. This is the first smart city project that they're going to do outside of China. They've done it in Hangzhou, and I think also in Guangzhou, if I'm not wrong, and a few other China cities within China. But Kuala Lumpur will be the first one that they were going to put out the infrastructure for a smart city. So that's the backdrop to the question on Huawei. I think the last question was sort of tied to the pandemic and the US thing. The Americans, I have to say this, the Americans, the Chinese themselves don't really come and ask us to pick sides. The Chinese says that, you know, as long as you stay neutral, it's a win for us already. They say that, you know, so long as you don't gang up with the Americans to oppose us, we'll be happy. You just stay neutral, don't take sides, that's fine. The Americans, however, do go the extra step, or not just saying that you cannot afford to stay neutral, you really have to take our sides, you know. Sometimes the Americans put it in those words. I think they are concerned. They are concerned that they may be losing the sort of dominance that they used to have in this part of the world. And it's kind of understandable when you are the big brother, you know, the big power, and somehow your influence has been being eroded by someone else that is not necessarily your friend. You do want to protect your own turf. So you see them coming up fairly strongly asking us to take sides. And for reasons I've given early on, Malaysia tend not to want to go down that path. I think we just want to stay neutral if we can. And on that, if we stay neutral, then the Chinese side seems to be quite happy to live with that. But it's the American side that's feeling uncomfortable. Okay.
Let's come with next set of questions. Are there any cooperation between Malaysia and Philippines to boost the economy now? That is in post-COVID situation. That is one question. Like, are Malaysia and Philippines working together to revive the economy? So maybe you might not be interested on this economic issue. You might skip. Second is, you said in relative terms, dealing with United States is easier as it is an open society. Has it changed under Trump administration? Third question is, ASEAN has launched its outlook on the Indo-Pacific region in the recent past, which does not have a direct link to Malaysia's foreign policy legislation. How far do you think this strategy will reap advantages for Malaysia in particular?
The last question is Indo-Pacific, right?
Yes, on Indo-Pacific.
And like, what exactly?
How far do you think this strategy will reap advantages for Malaysia?
By staying neutral, not part of the Indo-Pacific?
Being a part of Indo-Pacific.
Okay. Let me just do the Indo-Pacific. We do not want to be part of what we think is a strategy that seeks to contain China. So, because we want to see this is as an Asia thing, you know, an inclusive thing. And the Indo-Pacific, as it is currently being framed, is not really inclusive. It is deliberately exclude China. So ASEAN doesn't see, Malaysia doesn't see that as something that fits into their own overall foreign policy. So that's the reason why we don't see we will be part of that. The question about Malaysia and Philippines, no, I know that Pramod will probably announce later on, next Monday will be a conversation between Malaysia, one of my director, and a Filipino scholar on the China-US relationship. No, we don't. As far as I know, between Malaysia and Philippines kind of economic collaboration, I'm not familiar with. I'm not very familiar with that. Within ASEAN, maybe Malaysia would have more with the Singaporeans and Thailand and in Indonesian, but less so with Indonesia, Philippines. Maybe someone else would have more information on that. On Donald Trump and the current administration itself, we see that we like to think that it's just a blip, you know, it's just something that, just an anomaly that eventually America will regain its own self again. But it may be just being too naive or optimistic. I think for those of us who've been trained in America, and many Malaysians, intellectuals and scholars and leaders who are trained in the West, are very sympathetic to the American and the Western model. We know their strength, and we know their ideals. We know the principles that they adhere to. And like all of us, you know, we don't always live up to our ideals. Sometimes we fall, sometimes we fumble, but the core ideals are still there. And we still believe that the Western model, the American model still have their core values. I think we like to think that the current administration is just an anomaly. And then hopefully in a longer, middle and longer term that they will regain their footing, and then yeah, we will see them playing a much more constructive role in trying to bring these two powers together, you know, and find a coexistence between the two powers. Okay.
There is one interesting question which says that does Malaysia, with the change in government, also changes its proximity towards US or China? Like with the change in government, is there also change in Malaysian foreign policy towards China or United States?
Okay.
Another is that the European Union passed an act earlier to phase out palm oil of renewable fuels by 2030 due to deforestation concern. Is President Mahathir complaint of being bullied by powerful nation actually true? And the third question is, it is getting clear that the Western power are winning and the US are having tensions inside the country itself. Malaysia has a chance to get close to China, and it has the Chinese Malaysian, and that is a great access to closer touch with Chinese society. What's your view on this?
Okay, let's go on the Chinese, the last question first. Chinese, China, America decline, relative decline, the soft power, loss of soft power. As I said early on, we actually, even though we may not like what we see right now happening in America, it is still a country that we know better than actually we know China. And it is, I'm speaking as an ethnic Chinese in Malaysia, you know. So even as an ethnic Chinese, I do have some reservation about the Chinese model itself. It's a bit hard to understand. And if you don't have the language, it's even harder to understand. So my own, whenever I meet with my mainland Chinese counterpart, I just say that you guys have to really explain yourself better to the rest of the world and begin to open up and embrace some political reform so that the rest of the world can have a better understanding of who you are. Because we are in a very difficult position, because the power that we are quite familiar with has lost its way, which is the West, America. And the power that is becoming very dominant is a power that we still we don't really understand. So we are caught in the transition period. Ideal world is that the rising power is a power that begins to explain itself better, that we are more familiar with, a power that is much more open, much more candid with us. And then ideally the incumbent power will find its way again, and then will find its own old self again. And then the two powers will be able to coexist. Yeah. So we are in a difficult transition right now. Simply because the American has lost its way doesn't mean that the Malaysians are really ready to embrace China either. There are certain sets of concerns that we have with regard to China's political model. The palm oil and EU thing is certainly from the Malaysian perspective. It is driven by other concerns other than environment. We felt that the EU just uses the environment as an excuse to protect their own market. The Malaysian side felt that we have been unjustly targeted, and it has affected our palm oil industry very badly. So it's somewhat political. There may be a little bit of environmental justification, but the bulk of it is to protect their EU's own market. So that's our Ministry of Trade position. The change of government, the recent change of government in March, the backdoor government that we call, is very domestically driven. It's driven by domestic, ethno-nationalistic kind of dynamics between certain individuals, and also the tension between the Malaysian and the Chinese Malaysian in terms of governance. The international dynamics doesn't feature very strongly at all. So it doesn't really affect how Malaysia, the current administration, the Muhyiddin administration and the previous Mahathir's position on China, on the US has relatively unchanged. It has very little international impact. Yeah, to answer that question. Okay.
Let me go with two other interesting questions. Can you please highlight on China's BRI projects in Malaysia and some of the economic projects that both the countries are working on? Second question is, in terms of South China Sea, countries like Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia have multiple claimants on different islands. How can a mid-sized country like Malaysia or Vietnam or even Australia, a near neighbor, thought it can claim a state? How can they handle China, which is a practical sense of militarize these islands? I mean, as China has militarized many of the islands, how will this country will get those islands? This is the question regarding South China Sea. And third question is, there has been debate within Malaysian academic and think tanks community over the country's response and its approach to South China Sea more broadly, with some advocating a more conciliatory stance towards China in the interest of closer bilateral relations, and others advancing a nationalist enough is enough argument that calls for deeper cooperation with the United States in order to stand up against China. The majority of the voice, however, continue to support a cautious approach, wary of making an irreversible strategic initial step. What is your view on that?
So second and third question are somewhat tied, right? South China Sea.
Yes, it's like both are similar.
Okay, let me do that first then. The South China Sea, we don't have the military capacity to stand up against China. That is why the US presence is important. So the small countries like Malaysia, the Philippines, and certainly Vietnam will want to have the US military presence there. As a matter of fact, I did have some of my Malaysian Navy, in some of Navy conversation, they were just saying that it is the Americans sometimes that would inform us that our water has been encroached by some foreign vessel, because we just don't have the maritime capacity to patrol all our maritime borders, you know. So our capacity is somewhat limited and militarily. So that is why America's, the West military presence is important to counterbalance. Having said that, I don't think the Chinese wants to find a military solution to the South China Sea. The South China Sea military build-out by the Chinese are mainly is a reaction to the Americans' heavy presence, military heavy presence. So it's an action and reaction kind of thing. Malaysia has bilaterally been in conversation with China on joint developments. They have explored with Brunei as well, and also with the Philippines. It has gone to fairly advanced stage in terms of the exploration, in terms of fishery, in terms of oil exploration and that sort of thing. And I said earlier on is that, we do not, it is to nobody's benefit to resolve this conflict militarily. It's ideally we have to solve this through diplomatic means or political sort of collaboration and a compromise. So I think that's the ideal. We hope it won't get out of hand. It won't sort of the situation, the tension doesn't rise to a level where we miscalculate each other's move and then get into an open conflict. The BRI is huge. It's in my hometown in Malacca. I'm not too sure, Pramad, you've been to my hometown. My hometown, Malacca, has the same history as Goa in India. It was a Portuguese settlement, and it has a long history with China during the Ming Dynasty. Zheng He visited. So the visual impact across the horizon, it's a coastal town, it's almost like a little Dubai. This is pre-COVID-19, by the way. Skyscrapers, land being reclaimed, and skyscrapers coming up from the sea. A little mini city rising up. The Chinese brought in their excess capacity. That was about 5 years ago. The excess capacity that they had in terms of they're able to build infrastructure out to Southeast Asia. And Malaysia was their launch pad. In many ways, the BRI, the maritime component of the BRI in Southeast Asia, Malaysia was the kind of a launch pad. A lot of projects that they wanted to have, they started it off in Malaysia. So Malacca, my hometown, is one. And then the East Coast Railway line from the east coast of Malaysia to the west coast of Malaysia is another one. Another one was this, has since been postponed, is the Singapore high-speed rail linking to Kuala Lumpur that will eventually link up to Penang and to Bangkok. These infrastructure projects are huge, and as you know, infrastructure projects are economic driver. They have got rippling effect. They can have downstream effect, generate secondary and third tier economic momentum along the way. And the Chinese were the one that were willing to invest. They help us build, and now because of the COVID-19 thing, even before the COVID-19 thing, our Mahathir came in because Mahathir came in because of perceived sort of mismanagement of some of these projects by the previous administration, the Najib administration, that Mahathir renegotiated some of the projects, and they got a sort of terms that are more favorable to Malaysia. And one of those terms that are more favorable to Malaysia was that the Chinese would come in as investors, not just the builders. They must be committed to the project. They must be committed that these railway lines that they build are eventually viable. We don't want them just to build and leave. We want them to build and run it and to make it profitable. So those were the terms that we sort of inserted in our renegotiation with them. So they have got long-term commitment to these projects, so that this project doesn't turn out to be white elephant, So I think the Belt and Road Initiative thing is very important, not only for Malaysia, but for the rest of Southeast Asia as well. Post-COVID-19, however, from what I hear right now is that because of the US trade war as well, US-China trade war, the Chinese, during the recent 2 plenary meeting, has sort of shifted now. They say that their focus now will be the domestic market, the domestic economy. And once upon a time, pre-COVID-19 and pre-trade war, they felt that China needed to expand globally, become a global, connected to the global market in order to drive its economic growth. But now the focus seems to say that, because the international arena is so difficult with all this trade war and bans that is happening, restriction that is imposed on the Chinese, by the West anyway, investment, the Chinese says we are having second thought now. Maybe the priority is not international and outside. Let's build the domestic market as the main locomotive of our economic growth. So that was just decided a few months ago. How would that translate into our BRI? I'm not too sure. I think I would expect that there will be less enthusiasm and less fundings and money for BRI in the months or years to come. If that happens, then it will be to our disadvantage. I hope it won't, but we will see. Yeah.
Let's take the last set of questions. Is there any rise of racism against ethnic Chinese during this COVID pandemic in Malaysia, as it happened in Philippines, as per BBC News? Second is also very similar. How does Malaysian government deals with anti-Chinese sentiment against the ethnic Chinese in Malaysia during the COVID situation? And the last question is, India has avoided being drawn into US and China power rivalry, even as it seeks to keep ties with Beijing stable even after the border standoff that is taking place at the moment. Will countries of non-aligned movement can come together for each other's rescue? As there is a discussion that there will be the emergence of new Cold War. So during Cold War or even before that, there was a kind of non-aligned movement of all these countries. So is it possible to revive that kind of mechanism now?
I cannot speak to the specific issue about the Indian-China border here because I do not know the details enough to be able to say directly to those issues. But I can say that the non-aligned new sort of movement thing is very appealing to us, especially as these two, and as we move into this new Cold War era with these two powers now pitting one against the other and trying to push us into different sides. And we want to stay as neutral as long as we can. So I think that is basically what we are trying to do. So I'm not too sure how Nepal is going to react to the US and the China-India kind of dispute. I guess you guys are caught in the middle as well. So, but for us in ASEAN, certainly between the US and China side, the non-aligned movement is really alive here today. I mean, the spirit of non-alignment, being neutral, is something that is very strategic for our own interests, for our own survival. On the question of racism, for those of you who follows a little bit about the Malaysian dynamics, is that Malaysia is very multiracial. We have right now about 60 to 65% are Malay majority, the ethnic Malays, and then about 20% are Chinese, and then about another 15% are Indian Malaysian. So we have always lived in that sort of multiracial dynamic that has its pluses and also its difficulties, and we have never been able to completely resolve all the underlying sort of difficulties that we have, but we managed to sort of live with it. And there are moments that it's get a little bit more difficult than other moments. So the kind of racism that we face actually is not the kind of racism that you see in the US, where they deliberately target, for example, right now we are seeing with George Floyd incident. The kind of racism that we has a well-intended sort of underlying thinking about it. It really wants to level the playing field. the Malay majority feels that they cannot compete on a level playing field with the ethnic Chinese and ethnic Indian Malaysia, because they just do not yet have the competitive sort of culture to play, to compete openly with the minorities. So therefore, they need affirmative action. They need affirmative action for the majority in this instance. Usually affirmative actions are for the minorities, but in Malaysia, the affirmative actions are for the majority, and it comes in the form of quotas for university entrance. 70-80% of university positions or vacancies are given to the ethnic Malays, and then some positions in the corporate world, the government-linked corporations and others are also reserved specifically to the Malay race, just to make sure that the Malays majority have representation in those key institutions and those places of influence and importance. So that's it. That's the basic kind of a dynamics that we have. And I have a lot of sympathy for the difficulty that we face right now. As a country, we need to do, as a Malaysian, I felt that we need to be able to continue to address this fundamental inequality, socioeconomic inequality that still cuts across along racial lines. And this will be something that need to be done at least another 1 or 2 generations, because it will take a while for us to really come to the point where we don't need that kind of affirmative actions anymore. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for your time. We really get to learn a lot, because from this part of the world, Malaysia seems very far, though we are very near, because we are not connected much in terms of geopolitics and all, but there is a deep connection, economic connection between Nepal and Malaysia. There are lots of Nepalese migrant workers working in Malaysia, and we know the country, we know the location, we know the people, but on the political issue, on geopolitical issue, we hardly get to hear about it. So thank you a lot for your time, Peter. Maybe we'll be asking you again in future on some other topics. And obviously, we are on, I think, 9th of June, we are having another joint collaboration program with NICE and your institute. So at the time, there'll be more lively debates on these issues. So we'll be continuing this. Hope to see you again.